good morning, my listeners. This is Victor Doctor, and this is Good Morning BSS World Podcast. Today, with my special guest, who is Peter Ryan, Principal at Ryan Strategic Advisory. Hi, Peter.
Hi, good to be here.
It's so nice to connect with you. I am based in Poland, in Warsaw here, and you are now at?
I'm in Montreal, Quebec, Canada.
So half a world from me. It's like 7,000 kilometers probably from here.
I tend to measure things now after almost 20 years in this industry, how long on the plane. And I think door to door from Warsaw to Montreal, you'd be looking at about an 8.5, 9 hour flight.
8.5 hours flight, quite a long distance. Anyway, let's move to some business topics. You are a principal at Ryan Strategic Advisory since 2016. To be honest, I went through your LinkedIn profile, and at some stage you were involved in the Bank of Ireland activities, weren't you?
I was, yes. I lived in Ireland for a couple of years, and for one of those years, I worked at Gateway Computers, that many people will remember when it was a great supplier of computer equipment. Back in the early 2000s, late 90s. And for my other year in Ireland, I did indeed work at the Bank of Ireland, yeah.
I did find it very interesting, actually, because for some time of my life, I was also involved in the Irish businesses, where one of the clients of my company was Bank of Ireland. So
small world.
Small world, small world. But let's move to the Ryan Strategic Advisory. What are you doing in this advisory area?
Victor, it's a good question. I started Ryan Strategic Advisory in 2016 so that I could work with contact center providers, contact center technology players, investment promotion agencies, industry associations related to customer experience, to help them figure out what was the best pathway forward for their respective entities. And over the course of the past 4.5 years, it's been just an incredible amount of interesting projects, meeting new people, forging new alliances. And it really, I think, has borne out the fact that there is a great need for independent analysis, independent advisory and consultative services in a sector that's constantly progressing and moving forward, but has been moving forward, I would say, at a breakneck speed. We've seen a lot more innovation the past 4 or 5 years in the CX services space. We've seen a lot more in terms of changing demands and the requirements of contact centers, CX organizations, BPOs to respond in kind. And I think it's that level, that pace, that acceleration that keeps this job so interesting.
So you mentioned some changes in the CX world. So let's focus on that. How did the CX services, how did the call contact center services, this customer relations changed within the last, let's say, 5-10 years?
Well, it's a great question. And I would say probably if we're talking the longer term, over the 10 years, the biggest issue or the biggest thing that I've seen change is the shift away from the telephone and more towards digital channels. I don't think it's any surprise that nowadays that when somebody has an issue, when they pick the phone up, they've probably exercised already 2 or 3 other options. They've probably tried to do self-help. They've probably gone on to some type of an FAQ. They've probably tried using a chatbot or interacting with a live chat agent. The phone has really become, I would say, the more default option when you're becoming exasperated. Whereas a decade back, what happened if you had an issue with your bank account or with your telephone or with your cable connection? You just picked the phone up and you tried to contact somebody. Now I'm finding that enterprises are having to adapt because the average consumer, whether it's you, whether it's me or anybody else, is actually saying, I really don't want to talk on the phone. And everyone's got their reasons for it. It could be because they just don't like talking on the phone. It could be because they find talking on the phone frustrating, or they're doing it already too much during the day. Maybe they find digital interactions a little bit more straightforward. But the opting out of the traditional mean of communication towards more digital options or choices is probably the biggest takeaway over the last decade. Now, if we're talking the last 5 years, which I think is equally relevant, it's the advent of advanced technology in the CX management space. probably people would immediately think, oh, you're talking about automation. Well, automation is definitely part of it, but automation has been around a long time. I would say smart automation is probably more apropos. Automation that's being enabled by artificial intelligence, artificial intelligence that is being designed to work in tandem with automated solutions in order to improve the customer experience, whether it's using a voice-based interface or a digital one. Equally speaking, Victor, we're seeing a lot more interest now in what I would say the analytics technologies comprise. Analytics, getting to know the client, has become not just, I'd say, an issue that's been around a long time, because it certainly has, but the different levels of technology that you can use around analytics to get into almost a granular point to understand not just a consumer segment or a consumer geography, but down to the actual consumer. It's under such demand, but so many enterprise contact centers don't know how to deploy it and work with the BPO community to do so. And when we look at elements around security, we're seeing a lot more interest in different security and data protection elements that need to go into the CX space. We're seeing a lot more demand in terms of things like blockchain. Certainly, I think a lot of interest around cloud solutions now, not just in terms of enabling a virtual workforce, but also the security that a good cloud solution can bring to the table. So a lot to chew on there, but definitely those would be the key trends, I think, over the past 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, this evolution of omni-channel, multi-channel relationships between the client and the company who he wants to connect. This has developed in an enormous way. But I was always wondering, was it like that this was a customer service industry who thought it will be good to implement some new tools and give it to the audience, let's say, to use, or it was actually people who said, we don't want to talk to people anymore, we want to use some fancy technology which will allow us to be supported better? What do you think?
Look, it's a bit of chicken and egg here, and we shouldn't be surprised at the fact that people were becoming more acclimatized and more accustomed to using digital technology. Do you remember, Victor, when the internet first became a popular thing in the mid to late 1990s, and everyone was going on email, everybody was emailing back and forth. And I remember a market analysis firm in the late 90s, early 2000s said that by 2010, 65% of interactions will be email driven and only 35% will be voice driven. Well, that clearly didn't happen. But the point was, we were becoming acclimatized at that time, when we were a heck of a lot younger than we are now, that it's okay to interact with an organization using email. And then we started doing chat. Do you remember when the whole idea about chat rooms started coming out? Well, that acclimatized people to using chat as a means of interacting back and forth in a personal standpoint. Why not a commercial one as well? We've seen social media take off, not just in terms of popular culture, but in terms of business culture and CX culture as well. So I think the plethora of different channel options out there has given people a sense that they got the power as consumers to interact with organizations. And it will be on the organization to respond in kind. And this is why so many enterprises and their outsourcing partners are now deploying not one, not two, but multiple different channels, whether it's voice-based ones or if it's digital ones.
I can even see such funny thing that, for example, now using Messenger, where people are just putting some text messages into it. Now there is a new trend just to record the short voice comments. So a lot of people are contacting in such a way.
No, but this is it. And I mean, think about what we're doing now, speaking on video chat, and think to the extent that we're going to see individuals starting to want to interact more with enterprises and their outsourcing partners via video chat. Now, I know a lot of people would probably not want to be seen on camera, but there's a lot of people who are just used to it, and it wouldn't cost them a thought. If they've got an issue they want to resolve, get on a video chat with a company that they're buying a product or service from. And this is the important thing in the dynamic that we're facing today. Enterprises have to respond. If they are finding that a significant amount of their consumer base wants to use a particular channel, they have to deploy it. Otherwise, those consumers are going to go somewhere else.
Thanks for that. So we touched a little bit the technology, which has developed a lot within the last few years, and now it's still changing, it's still evolving, still new things are appearing on the market. Let's now move to a second part of our conversation. I must say that the main reason why I have you here is actually to go through one of the surveys which you created some time ago, very recently, to be honest. But before we touch this survey, I would like to touch the geographical subject. So how the locations, global locations, from your perspective, when it comes to the customer service locations look like now? Do we see that some regions are more experienced, more developed, or actually this is so common worldwide that we can run this kind of services wherever we like?
There's definitely some locations that are going to have a greater level of maturity and a greater level of historic experience in terms of managing customer interactions. And there's no surprise here, Victor. It would be like the Philippines, it would be India, it would be Morocco, it would be South Africa. What I think is interesting in the context of what we're talking about today, though, is the fact that with the need for business continuity that's being driven by the pandemic, and that's being driven by COVID-19, there seems to be a sense amongst enterprises that they no longer want to work with an outsourcer or have their own captive centers based in one or two locations. You can't have all your eggs in one basket, to use a cliche. Rather, they want to be working in a sense where you're going to have a diversified network of delivery points, ones that if a particular site goes down, you can have redundancy and transfer capacity over to another series of locations. If there's one thing that the last year's taught us, is that I think a lot of people felt that the plateau is hitting in terms of the number of locations that were going to be appropriate for offshoring. And we've seen a lot more come up. Over the course of the past 12, 18 months, I've seen new locations in Africa become very much mainstream. I've seen new locations in the Caribbean become very mainstream. In your part of the world, in Central Eastern Europe, there's spots that perhaps I wouldn't have thought of a couple of years ago, where they're actively looking to go out and promote themselves as logical destinations where CX work can be done.
Okay, thanks for that. I did review actually a number of various reports within the last decade, and very often those Philippines and Malaysia, they were given as the center of the world when it comes to call contact center services provided, especially in the English language, because of course we can have a different locations when it comes to the support in French, in Portuguese or Dutch, and so on and so on. But this English part was very much located over there, and one of the reasons I heard that those Philippines were so popular was that actually people living over there do not have accent. So they are very, let's say, nice to hear.
Well, I mean, I think there's no question that the agent community in the Philippines is very motivated and definitely has a strong affinity for English language support and English language culture. I wouldn't go so far as to say that accents don't exist. I think that depending on the organization and their ability to find people who've got experience speaking English, there are some that have certainly done a great job in terms of neutralizing accents or perhaps even acclimatizing to the UK, to Australia, or to North America. At the end of the day, accents are one part of it. I think the ability to problem solve, the ability to provide a pleasant interaction is also very important. And there's no question that the Philippines, over the course of the past 25, 30 years, has really been at the forefront of some of this strong offshore work. And the fact that they've got over 1 million people doing this type of work currently in the Philippines is testament to the strong efforts by the industry providers and by the industry association in that regard.
But look now, you did create the 4th edition of your survey this year. I must say it was a great pleasure to go through that and listen to the outcomes. But I will leave it to you just to share with our audience how this survey was run, who actually was participating in that, and what kind of outcomes do we have in here, because Philippines are not on the top of the list.
No, you're absolutely right. And thank you for the chance to talk a little bit about the survey. So the 2021 Front Office Omnibus Survey is the annual sounding that Ryan Strategic Advisory does to find out what the enterprise contact center buyers are saying. So effectively, anybody who would be engaging with an outsourcer or with a CX technology company, that's who we were speaking with. Now, Victor, this year we had nearly 630 respondents, and they were based in the United Kingdom, in France, Germany, Italy, Spain, Australia, Canada, and the United States. So we had 8 different countries. We surveyed 11 or 12 different vertical markets, about a dozen vertical markets. And interestingly enough, we had mature users of contact center services such as retail banking or telco. But we also have, I'd say, cutting edge ones that we've added over the years, including digital enterprises. So firms, examples are ones that do all their business over the internet. Equally, we also brought in fintech this year, which I think was a really interesting angle. That it's a sector that's growing, and I think a lot of organizations want to find out what they're thinking in terms of their CX strategies and priorities. So we asked a whole series of different questions. One of the series of questions that we asked related to offshoring and various elements around offshoring and the geographies and the geographic preferences that the respondents from the enterprise CX decision maker side had. And we did come up with some very interesting results, and I'll take you through them quickly here. Sure. The most popular across all 628, across all these different geographies and verticals, was South Africa. It was the top spot ranked for 2021. In second place was India. And India, it'll be remembered, was in first place last year. It dropped to second. South Africa last year was second. So effectively, it switched place with India. For third place, there was a tie. And you mentioned the Philippines. Philippines was tied for third with 2 other countries. One of them was Malaysia, which you referenced earlier as well. And the other one, interestingly enough, was Poland. So Poland did very, very well. And congratulations to Poland for a great result. In fourth place, coming back into the top 5 after a year out of it, was Egypt. Now, Egypt was in the top 5 back in 2019. It dropped out of the top 5 ranking in 2020, but it made a monster comeback in 2021. And in 5th place was Northern Ireland.
Nice destinations, to be honest. With this Egypt, I am not surprised. They are very multilingual location, and they are very easy to learn the foreign languages. So, and they are also supporting not only the Africa's region, but also the Middle East. So that might be the reason.
Well, the other thing too is, Victor, I would say that taking into account Egypt's performance, when we look at all the countries in the top 5, they had the strongest one across all the different 8 demand markets. So whereas South Africa did much better in the English language markets, or perhaps we had the Czech Republic that did well amongst German respondents, Egypt did well in Western Europe, it did well in North America, and it did well in Australia. So I think what they've done is, over the years, crafted a value proposition based around multilingualism, where they're certainly able to serve clients in the Middle East, but they're also very capable of serving clients in English and French and German, in Dutch and Spanish and so forth. And that served them very well.
And about this South Africa, what do you think is the success of this destination?
Well, right off the top, Victor, investment promotion counts. No other country, I think, has been promoting their BPO or their CX sector as aggressively as South Africa has over the course of the past 3 or 4 years. And I've had the opportunity of seeing the South African delegations at industry events in the United Kingdom, in Australia, in North America. I've had the chance to see the intense work that they've done promoting their sector on channels such as LinkedIn, or using digital means over the course of the past year or so. And I think developing that awareness has really led them to driving not just a story of success in traditional demand markets like Australia or the United Kingdom, but certainly in North America. They were ranked in both the US and Canada as the #1 most favored destination. And funnily enough, I work very closely with a friend of mine called Mark Angus, who's with a firm called Knowledge Executive, a research firm. And he has talked about how over the course of the past 12 to 18 months, they have tracked a huge number of contact center jobs in South Africa that are being designed specifically to service clients in the United States and Canada. So the proof is really in the pudding in that regard.
So this promotion pays off.
It does. And I mean, notwithstanding the fact that I think that they have crafted a very strong quality-based value proposition. They've not been hesitant about bringing people over from some of the key demand markets to see firsthand what South Africa has to offer on the ground, whether it's in Cape Town or Johannesburg or Durban or any other community for that matter. There's a level of understanding about South Africa that exists now from a CX perspective that I would argue didn't exist maybe 10 years ago.
Okay. And was there anything what surprised you once doing the survey this year?
There was a few things that surprised me. We saw a number of, I would say, niche or targeted levels of demand for a few different offshore destinations. For instance, Jamaica has always been a strong play in the US and Canada, but it performed exceptionally well amongst the United Kingdom respondents this year. And we know for a fact that Jamaican-based outsourcers are really looking to try and promote themselves as an alternative for the British consumer or from the standpoint of the British enterprise. And we're starting to see proof in that sense. It's coming out in the survey work that's being done. Another one that was really interesting, Victor, was the fact that Zimbabwe performed very, very well in a number of different English language markets. And again, investment promotion counts. Something that I would advise any of your listeners to pay attention to is the Contact Center Association of Zimbabwe that has been incredibly active on LinkedIn, in not just from the standpoint of promotion, but from thought leadership. And I think that's developing a sense that Zimbabwe, while perhaps it might not have been on the radar 5 or 6 years ago, is certainly becoming an option that's being at least studied by a lot of different enterprises and their outsourcing partners. And another one that I would just call out quickly was the fact that Senegal, which is known for very strong French language support, was the #1 location in France amongst our French respondent community. I had the chance to visit Senegal a couple of years ago. I was thoroughly impressed with what I saw on the ground when I was in Dakar. They've got a burgeoning BPO and CX industry, and I think that they've been able to position this not just from the perspective of cost and value to the French community, but also from the standpoint of the quality that could be derived for French consumers in Europe or French-speaking consumers in Canada.
I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but once you were discussing the outcomes of the survey, there was also Rwanda, which was mentioned over there.
Yes, correct. Yeah, good memory. Rwanda also did very, very well in a number of different key demand markets. And I think, again, it's testament to the fact that the government in Rwanda is working very closely with the private sector to try and develop a value proposition that is resonating with key demand markets. And I have nothing but the best of hope that they're going to succeed in that regard.
We know that Poland is #3.
Yeah.
Together with Philippines and Malaysia.
Yeah.
Okay. What other European-based locations were appearing during those discussions, this analysis of the survey?
Sure. Okay, so obviously Poland did very well. And something I think that's important for Poland was the fact, Victor, it wasn't just 3rd place, but put into context, it was tied for 1st place amongst German language respondents. And in the United Kingdom, it was a close 2nd behind India and South Africa, which tied for 1st. We're seeing a lot of interest in Poland in regards to scalability in terms of talent and in terms of multilingualism as well. Czech Republic was a strong player. It certainly performed quite well in Germany and to some degree in the United Kingdom, I would argue too. Funnily enough, amongst our friends in Italy that responded to the survey, we saw that there were 2 countries that surprised me. We've never surveyed Italy before, so it's going to be a surprise no matter what. But #1 by a mile was Slovenia, and Croatia was 2nd place as well. And we also saw a great deal of resonance for Romania as a location of choice, certainly to serve the Italian-speaking consumer community in the Europe.
Yeah, I'm not surprised about that, to be honest, because they do have very good language skills over there. So I've been visiting Romania some time ago, and I must say that the call contact center industry over there is very well performing. But for Italians, I also heard that they are using the Albania located businesses.
Yeah, Albania is definitely, I'd say, a strong contender for Italian-based work. I won't lie to you, Victor. Albania didn't perform as well as, say, Romania or Poland or the Czech Republic or even Croatia or Slovenia. But there's a lot of work going into the Albanian CX sector from Italy and performing very well from all intents and purposes.
Yeah, the reason of that might be the size of the country. This is not a big country, big destination, and maybe that's why.
It's possible. It's also possible that the industry needs to do a little bit more promotion. It's not as well known, but as with anything, you will get out what you put into it. And I have no doubt that there's going to be a lot of efforts putting into Albania as a spot that can not just do Italian work, but also multilingual work.
Okay, thank you for that. Let's take a look on the future. How do you think, or what do you think will change within the next months and years in the CX industry?
Well, it's a really good question. I think that what we're going to be seeing in the CX industry is a return into the contact center. I think that the idea about work from home is not going away, but we're going to see a lot of organizations saying that within their scope of their own operations and what they expect of their BPO partners is that they want to have the bulk, if possible, of the agents working in the contact center for a variety of reasons. But we're picking up a lot of this now, especially as we're seeing vaccines rolled out in a bigger way. I think equally, though, we can't underestimate the extent to which work from home is going to stay a big part of the CX life. Going into the pandemic, I'd say work from home accounted for maybe 5% of total support for consumers. Now we're looking at a significantly larger percentage, and I'm not going to say it's going to stay where it is now, but I think it's going to be a structural part of what we do. Equally speaking, I think that we should anticipate that enterprises are going to be a lot more discerning and demanding of the organizations that they work with from the BPO and the technology side. And Victor, watch out as well, because I think knowledge management is going to be a much bigger play within the scope of the contact center in terms of driving revenue and in terms of driving loyalty.
And do you think we will have much more AI in call contact centers?
I think it goes without saying. I think that the development of AI has been a boon for the contact center space. It's not going away, but if anything, we're going to see more of it being applied to a whole series of different elements. And I think it's not just going to be just helping position the best thing to consumers, but it's also going to be helping agents do their jobs better.
Okay, yeah, thanks very much for that. The last but not least, I usually ask my guests a question about the books they are reading or the books they are inspiring them on their day-to-day life or in their business. What's the book you would recommend?
Well, I'll tell you what, I've been doing a lot of, I tended to do lots of reading when I would travel because I was on planes all the time. And I found that was a great place to just, really zone out and read something you're interested in. I've got a lot of different topics I read about: history, politics. I've got a real interest in the Cold War, but I'm going to flip it a little bit in a different direction, Victor, and talk about the last book that I finished. And that was the autobiography of Paul Stanley, who you might remember is the guitarist and one of the singers for Kiss. And I'm a longtime fan of Kiss. Seen them live several times. Have pretty well every album that they have ever made. But listening to get behind the makeup, so to speak, and to understand who Paul Stanley is, where he came from, and some of the struggles that he endured growing up. And a lot of people don't know this. I'm sure if they didn't read the book, but he was born with a physical deformity on his ear, and being able to overcome that, being able to find something he was good at, something he enjoyed doing in the form of music, the challenges they had when they formed the band actually being taken seriously, and just the work and the persistence they put in, just every last possibility of finding a show, they would do it just for the chance to get noticed. And then how very quickly that hard work rocketed into success. And really some of the struggles he's endured in his personal life sort of as an adult were quite interesting stuff people don't know about. But I think the message I would give to your listeners about this autobiography, number one, it's really well written, really interesting. And number two, if you ever want to read about somebody who is testament to the value of hard work, resiliency, and persistence, you don't need to look any further than Paul Stanley.
I already like this recommendation, so it looks like I have another book which I need to go through.
I think you'll like it. I think you'll like it. Even if you're not a fan of the band, I think that you'll find.
I am actually.
Okay.
I do love actually the band and the way how they did so far. It was a great history of this band.
Absolutely. Well, I think you'll like it then.
Okay, Peter, thank you very much for today. It was a great chat. The last question for our audience: if anyone would like to contact you just to go deeper into CX subjects, into maybe additional information about the survey and the outcomes, how to reach you, how to find you?
Best thing to do is to go to my website, www.ryanadvisory.com. And just so you and your listeners know, we will be updating the site in the next couple of weeks. It's due for a refresh. It's really been up since 2016. So I've got a great team of designers, and we are in the midst of making some changes. I actually had my photo session to populate with some photos for the site yesterday, and yeah, it's coming live. So if anybody wants to get in touch with me, that's the way to do it.
You are also available on LinkedIn.
I am very much on LinkedIn. Yeah, anybody can come find me on LinkedIn. I'm delighted to talk to them.
Peter, it was great to have you in my show. So thank you very much for all of the comments.
No, and I look forward to meeting in person. I've never been to Poland. I look forward to the chance to visit. It looks like a marvelous country. And along with yourself, I've got many friends who come from Poland. So we'll count on having a few beers in Krakow one of these days.
Krakow is the top BPO location in Poland, but I can assure you that we've got many more locations where you can find excellent companies and business professionals who are involved in the customer services in here. So once you are here, you are very welcome.
Well, it sounds like it's going to be a long trip, so I'm looking forward to that.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
And here it is, the end of the 43rd episode of Good Morning BSS World podcast. Thank you very much for being with us, listening to these very interesting stories from customer experience world. If you want to listen to more such conversations, to more topics which are related to outsourcing, shared services or other business services, then remember to subscribe to this show. It is available on YouTube and various podcast platforms worldwide. Thank you very much again and talk to you soon. Bye bye.